Welcome to the Conflict Stories podcast with Sam and Scott, where real people share their professional and personal stories of conflict.
Whether you're looking for advice or the comfort of knowing you're not alone, Conflict Stories brings the human and positive side of conflict to the forefront.
Tune in, connect, learn, and transform. Welcome to our next episode of Conflict Stories with me, Sam Hardy, and Scott Dutton. I'm joining you from the Peramunk lands in the Adelaide Hills. Scott, where are you today?
I'm in Byron Bay on Bundjalung country. Now, Tom Panos is a real estate coach, a legendary auctioneer, a social media influencer and commentator, and a relentless straight shooter. Tom's the founder of the Real Estate Gym, has trained more million-dollar agents than you've had hot dinners, and made headline-smashing auction records on the block. He opened his first real estate office at just 22 and hasn't looked back. These days, he's the go-to guru for agents chasing straight talk, amazing results, and zero fluff. On top of that, Tom's got a master's in coaching psychology, that would be interesting, and a PhD in tough love. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Scott. It's good to be here.
I'm pretty sure in real estate there's a fair bit of conflict, but before we get into that, and television, the block, I wondered, Tom, if you can tell us a little bit about your experience growing up. How was conflict handled in your family when you were a kid? How did you grow up thinking and experiencing conflict?
My parents are migrants from Greece, and culturally, and it's not just Greeks, but many Europeans, there wasn't that much conflict at home because you always obey your authority figures. You're taught to be very, very respectful. So I wouldn't compare it, Sam, to when I look at, my children now, right? And I look at people around me, I would say it was very, very different. We didn't have much conflict there. We were always taught, whether it was the church, school teachers, older people, that you always had to respect them, even though you may not have agreed with them. I think that's less so in the era of my children.
Yeah. And did you have siblings?
I had one sibling, but unfortunately he passed young. So yeah, I had a brother and his name was George. I was very, very close to. And it was very, very weird. There's another example, Sam. I never had conflict with my brother. He was my best friend. I never had conflict with my brother because I was the older brother. And that was another thing that, you respect your older brother. There was a hierarchy,
Yeah. And you've noticed a difference now with your kids?
Yeah. I think that my kids sometimes respond back to me and have conversations with me and my wife that are things that there's no way I would have had those kind of conversations and those approaches when I was a kid.
Okay, so Tom, I did parent-adolescent mediation for a long time, so I'm interested to know what are the key areas of conflict with your daughters.
Look, I think it's the normal stuff, like where are you going, how long are you going to be, right? And then it sort of moves involved in them, doing certain chores and responsibilities. And there are at other times disagreements on different approaches that they have towards life. But overall, I wouldn't say in terms of conflict that my daughters would be like high on my list. So even though I might be saying it's very different, it's still, I wouldn't call it a very problematic, but it's very, very interesting because you find with my daughters, I don't tell, I have to sell, right? It's right. It's like the authority figure that I had when I was being brought up. It was like, you don't argue, you follow those instructions, right? no different to employee employer. There's a chain command, but with certain times you can't tell. You've got to influence, you've got to sell, you've got to explain the benefits. And that's what I seem to be more with both Maddie and Christina, my two daughters.
I like that. You're not only having to sell as a real estate agent, you're having to sell with your daughters too.
I mean, the whole issue is that we're all selling. Even people that hate selling are actually selling, right? You've got to be selling to your children. This is the path forward. You've got to be selling to your partners. These are the reasons why you want to do this. You've got to be selling to your staff, right? Don't get me wrong. You have got KPIs with staff and say, I have these expectations. But to actually get really good work, telling is nowhere near as effective as influencing, when you can give them the real reasons that what's in it for them versus what's in it for you.
It's the same in our work, isn't it, Scott? When you're mediating with people in conflict, a lot of the time you're tempted to tell them what they should do, but that's not going to be as good for them as them figuring it out for themselves and negotiating an outcome that they've come up with rather than just being compliant.
Exactly. I'm interested, Tom, you said that sort of the family conflicts on the lower scale or the least stressful. You didn't quite use those words. I'm interested to know where the hide is. Where's the trickiest ones for you in terms of conflict? What do you find most challenging?
Business, Scott. It's business. And it's the nature of the work, because I work in the real estate industry, and the real estate industry is all about buyer, seller. And the buyer is looking to buy something at the cheapest price, and the seller is looking at selling it at the highest price. And you're there to narrow the gap. So in that, you're basically negotiating all the time. So Scott, you know that I run an auction business on the weekends, and there are a number of stakeholders involved in an auction. There's the seller, there's the buyer, and there's the real estate agent. And I actually have conflict with all three often, right? Right. And I would probably say, if I had to analyze, in a 7-day period, that would probably be the highest amount of conflict I have is on that Saturday. But I spend a lot of time in training and development Monday to Friday in my coaching business. And often that involves a fair bit of conflict negotiation, conflict resolution.
What are people in conflict about? Like when you're acting as an auctioneer, what sorts of things are bothering them about what's happening?
Well, Sam, most sellers that are selling a house believe their house is worth more than it's worth. Just like they think that their kid's smarter than any other kid on the planet. That's life, right? And I accept the emotional connection that people have with those things. So generally speaking, a buyer won't see the same value as what the seller's looking at. So often what you're doing is sitting there talking to the owner. And what complicates it often is that the real estate agent that's been involved in the process may have told the owner, you probably will get your price, right? And then they don't get their price. So let's just use examples. The owner thinks their house is worth $1 million. It's only worth 900,000. The buyers are trying to buy it as low as possible. So they're obviously trying to get it at 800. So you've got this, gap. And for me, sometimes the conflict is I have the vendor, the seller, saying to me, but Tom, thank you for everything that you've done, but I don't want to sell it at 900 because the real estate agent told me it's worth $1 million. And they do that. And it's not a good thing to do, but some agents do that. They overprice the business to get it. And then they use a term called vendor management / some people call it conditioning. It's a terrible word. And they force the owner to take a lower price. So sometimes my conflict is me sort of saying to the agent, look, number one, you've done the wrong thing. You've misled them to think that they're going to get that. So I have conflict there. They'll turn around, and who hires me generally is the agent. So the agent is thinking to themselves, I've hired this guy, and this guy here is not supporting me here because he's telling me that I've done this. So there's conflict with the agent, and there's also conflict with the owner, because I've got to sit there and say to the owner, look, I understand that you've owned this home for 20 years and it's brought up your wonderful family. And I also understand that you're moving from here and you're moving to Byron Bay next to Scott, and that Byron Bay prices are really expensive and you need to get as much as you can, because when you leave here, you're going to have to spend more money on Byron. And then I've got to sit there and explain to them, look, where you're moving to is called destination value. What we've got today is called market value. There's no link between the two, right? So I've got to help them understand that their value of their home has nothing to do with the fact that they want to move to Byron Bay. In fact, if they were going to move to, let's say they weren't going to move to Byron Bay, let's assume they were going to move to a regional suburb in northern Queensland where they can buy a house for 400,000. It doesn't mean that their house would have a different value there. So it's sitting there talking to them through this issue. And then with the buyers, you're often sitting there with the buyers and they're saying, we want to get it as cheap as possible. These are the sorts of things. And you also have to understand, Sam, it's quite stressful. 99% of average person's wealth is in their family home. So there are high emotions, and often people that are selling are getting separated or they've got financial problems. Anyone that's selling is normally triggered by an event in life. Sometimes they need more space, sometimes they want to change areas, but a lot of the times there's a serious issue. Separations, financial problems, health issues, having to move close to family because they're getting old, having to move close to a hospital because they've got a sick child. So that they are very stressful times. And I find that this is where I get stretched as an individual in, I love things being effortless and smooth and easy, but unfortunately, these are the bits of my life that aren't that.
And I imagine those conversations are happening under time pressure. You know, you don't interact with them for weeks and weeks leading up to this to manage their expectations, do you? It's all at the last minute when all those people are standing around ready to bid at the auction that you're having to have these conversations. So I'm sure that doesn't help.
No, it's generally speaking, if we're talking about an auction situation, we're talking about a 10-minute period where people are saying, I'll pay that. The vendor's saying, I'll accept that, but I need this settlement period. So it's all happening in a short period. It's not happening over days where you say, leave it with me, I'll come back to you. So emotions are sky high, and decisions need to be made. Yeah.
I know Sam's quite an expert on the topic of emotions in mediation, and I guess that's what I'm interested in, Tom. Like, what have you learned in terms of, as you say, managing very heightened emotions and a lot going on, lots of reasons for that? What's something you've learned as an auctioneer for however many years you've been doing it? What's the one thing or a couple of things you've learned to manage that heightened emotion?
I think probably the most important of the lot would be to take the approach that everyone is doing the best they can in that situation, right? To not be dismissive. And in my industry, it's really common for a vendor to be seen by an agent as being, oh, mate, he's crazy. Like you know what I mean? Or this buyer, they're deluding themselves. They think to themselves that they're going to be able to buy a 4-bedroom home with a swimming pool in a quiet street for that. Tell them they're dreaming. For me, it's helping understand that everyone is doing the best they can based on the circumstances that they have in their current life, based on their current situation, based on their financial resources, based on their IQ, based on their EQ. That's where they're at. Susan, that works with me, rang me up one day and just said to me, do you think people are doing the best they can? And my first reaction was, no, I don't. And she goes, you don't? I said, no, I don't. And she goes, oh, okay. A few hours passed, had a bit of spare time in throughout that day. And then I rang her up and I actually said to her something along the lines of, I'm not sure if they are or if they're not, but I think it's best to believe that people are. Because if you think they are, you will then actually be more useful in that situation because you're not stereotyping, you're not being narrow-minded, you're actually thinking to yourself, how can I help this situation right now? Because you're not judging it. Make sense?
Nice, Tom. Nice, Tom. And I like that because I think assuming the best is such an important part. I do a lot of team culture work, and I see when things get a little bit toxic, people are not assuming the best. They're often doing the judging, doing the assumptions, the negative assumptions, and that's where things really go downhill very quickly. So I really like that. Good on Susan.
So if you take the approach that, man, they're just doing the best they can, I find that helps me help a situation than actually judge a situation. So I also find that being curious, not critical, helps a lot. When you're curious, you're thinking, what made them say that? Like, where did they come from that? Like, and I had one today. I actually had an auction today. It was a challenging seller. And he said something, and I thought to myself, oh, no, I'm not in the mood. And then I thought, hang on a second, Tom, pause. Because pausing for me is very important. I found my life is significantly better when I pause, right? Everything is a lot better in my life if I just pause. So step number one is, even as if your brain's about to explode, I just say, Tom, just pause. It's okay. And by pausing, your response is different because you're responding not instinctively, you're responding having thought it through. And I remember today, and this only happened a few hours ago, I thought to myself, why is he thinking like that? I'll tell you what it was. I said to him, what's the last figure you're prepared to accept today? And he says, oh, I'm not telling you that. And I said, okay. And then I was going to turn around and say to him, listen, we're about to start the auction. We're on the same team here. I don't need this stress there. And I just sort of stopped there. And I thought, look, whether we start the auction today at 1:30 or 1:35, it's neither here nor there. Just slow it down. And I thought to myself, for him to say that, he must have had a bad experience in the past. And he thought, if I told Tom the number, he might not try and get me anymore. Maybe there was no trust there. So I find that pausing, being curious, having a mindset of they're doing the best they can is probably the three things that help me the most to keep things going without them imploding. And also sometimes just stepping away. Often I find when things are really tense, if you can actually buy time, right? And just say, listen, leave it for 5-10 minutes. Let's see who else registers. We'll have a chat, because it just diffuses high emotions at that time. And it's taken me, listen, I've changed as a person as well. I was a win person, right? I actually started off thinking that life was one person wins, another person loses. Then I moved on and thought, no, it's win-win. That would have been probably the second decade of my working life. But now I've also let go of the need to win, right? Like, what's the value of it? What's the big deal? Say you win, you walk away, you've proved a point, but you don't feel any better because everyone's not happy, right? And as you get older, You want people to be happy, right? You think to yourself, I just don't want to keep collecting wins along the way, because what do they do for your life, right? Happiness ends up being more important than being right all the time, you know?
Sounds like you've got this, Tom. Maybe we should hand over to you for some of our training because you've got all the right answers.
This is everything I've told you are the things that I should be doing all the time, but it's not the things I do all the time.
Oh, now we're getting into some juicy stuff. What are the sort of situations that make you forget all the things that you should be doing? What are the things that get Tom Panos in fight mode?
Okay. So the other day, I'm flying home. I'm sitting in economy, the first row after business. And there's two toilets on a plane, right? One at the front and one at the back. There's only, I think on this plane, there would have been maybe 4 or 6 business class seats. And if you're sitting right at the front, you're literally 2 meters from the toilets at the front. No one was using the toilet. I got up to use it. And as I'm about to go in, so I've literally walked 2 meters, the flight attendant comes out, says, I'm sorry, this one's not for you. You've got to use the toilets at the back. And I have a look, and you've got to remember, at the back, it's servicing maybe another 200 passengers. One toilet servicing 200 passengers and one toilet servicing 4 passengers, right? And there's a row of people there. And I just looked at the flight attendant, and I was, about to blow a head gasket, thinking to myself, well, there's no logic here. I'm at the door, right? I'm at the door. I also wanted to go to the toilet urgently. That didn't help as well, right? So, and I'm there, and I said, so you want me to go down there? And she goes, yeah. I said, but there's like 5 people waiting to go into the toilets there, and you want me to walk 20 meters down there when I'm here? And she goes, yeah. And I said, okay. And I was about to blow a head gasket. And I just turned around and I just thought to myself, she really doesn't want to say that either, right? But that's the policy, right? She was young and she's got a older supervisor there, the more senior attendant. She's following instructions, right? And I'm thinking, why am I getting angry at her? I should be getting angry at a stupid policy, right? But there's an example, and I don't even know why I brought that example up there, but there's an example of me maybe 10 years ago actually sort of maybe saying, I'll never fly with you guys again. That's absolutely rubbish. I fly so many flights, you're crazy, and walked away. But then I thought to myself, pause. And the issue with pausing is you got to remind yourself to pause. And because you can't just do it like in that moment. So I think part of it is, it's all right, you know what you know, but do you do what you know? So yeah, there's an example of the right way of handling it, actually. But there have been plenty of wrong ways of handling it, which I still do as well. But the one thing I will say is I am more mindful, and that helps a lot. Just being mindful and aware can actually help.
I think the other problem with your story there, Tom, is that you obviously haven't sat up in business class enough to know how annoying it is for those people down the back coming up and use your toilets.
Oh, Scott, are you saying that you fly business class all the time, do you? Now we're finding out the truth.
I'm going to pause for a moment. Just for a moment, Scott. Just for one moment, Scott. Yeah, he's on the front of the plane more than he is on the back of the plane.
It is kind of sad when you have to pay for toilet privileges, isn't it? What's the world coming to, seriously?
The funny thing was, I've invited someone onto this podcast who is a flight attendant, and I don't sit in business that often, but I was this time. And she was very firm, almost like the way you described it, Tom. It might have been her that sort of said, excuse me, and she used her hand. She went, whoop, stop.
Toilet police.
I think she even mentioned your name, Tom. Anyway, Tom, another thing I'd love to know is, obviously you've had a lot of experience on the block. You've been the best auctioneer on the block, according to yourself. And
It's a credible source. It's a credible source. He knows himself better than anyone else, right?
Yeah. So if there's anyone that's going to make the judgment, it's got to be me, right?
no, your figures back it up. Now, what conflict have you had on the block? Because it seems like a very interesting thing to film. What are the challenges you've had, any conflicts you've had with any of the parties involved?
So the block's an interesting auction because it's not like the tens and thousands of auctions that take place across Australia and around the world, I'm sure, every week. And that's because it's a media auction and they don't care that much about whether they buy a 4-bedroom home with a bathroom because the majority of the buyers are trying to buy media attention on the block on grand final night, 7:30 on a Sunday night on Channel 9 is prime viewing time. Often what you find is you've got to work out the real currency of why that person is there. Most auctions, the buyer is there because the buyer wants to buy a home for themselves, their family, an investment. But on the block, let's talk about Adrian Portelli, the Lambo guy. Is not buying a property on the block because he wants to put his young child and his partner in there. He's buying it because he wants Australia to know that he has a business called LMCT Plus, that he's a brand. He wants to be on TV. He doesn't care about having a buyer's agent represent him. He wants to be front and center. So often what you're doing as an auctioneer in those situations is trying to work out what's in it for them here, right? And trying to understand why are they there? And I often find that I'm negotiating things like, well, I'll tell you the back scoop view on what happened with the block when I met Adrian Portelli for the first time before he had really any recognition, right? So I met him about 4 or 5 years ago and he came in with an LMCT Plus t-shirt and I automatically, my EQ works out. He showed up here. He's not media shy. He is looking for the commercial opportunity. So I went to him and I said, look, using a bit of reverse psychology there, I said, look, we get two types of buyers. There are those that want to be discreet and there are those that actually don't care about being discreet. If you do want to be discreet, I would suggest that you sit over here during the auction because you won't have the cameras facing you. Alternatively, if you don't mind, and in fact, if you'd like the world to see LMCT Plus and me to actually say Adrian Portelli from LMCT Plus, I would suggest that you stand here. And let me tell you that if you give me a very strong opening bid, I'll make sure that the world knows who you are. If you don't give me a very strong bid, I will just quickly skim over it. And I said, I might even actually say that would have been a good bid 10 years ago, not today, sir, right? And something like that. So I find that what you've got to do is try and dig behind the surface and work out what's in it for them. What's the currency here? What are they looking for?
Did that cause you any conflict?
Did it cause me conflict? Well, yes, it did, because obviously I want to let you know that there was another buyer at that auction who was known as Danny. And Danny is the person that's been buying houses for years on the block. He was a successful technology entrepreneur that's been buying properties and use them as kids shelters. He's very kind. He donates the houses there, right? So you got to also understand he was in it also for the profile. He liked the profile and he's known as the guy, and I don't know if you watch the block, you may or may not, but he's the person that always would give odd number bids. $1,433,447, right? So in many ways, what you've got is you've got two people that both want to look like, a superhero on the day, the man of the block. And it's managing, elevating one, but on the same time, by elevating one, not demoting the other. And I never thought about it till you actually asked the question, because a lot of the times, often you're doing things in an unconscious way, aren't you? You're not thinking them through, but instinctively, your brain is moving at a fast speed, thinking to itself, I've got to do that. But if I offend that person, then he's not going to bid, then there. So somehow I've got to actually make them both feel good.
It sounds like being an auctioneer in some ways is really like being a mediator. You're trying to mediate between the buyer and the seller, but also sometimes between buyers, and you're trying to keep everyone happy and get them to do the best they can in this particular negotiation. I'm sure you've actually got lots of mediation skills going on there.
Maybe, I'm not sure. I'm not a mediator. I don't know. Scott's a bit of a mediator, isn't he? I don't know. I walk out of an auction feeling like everyone hates me. Is that what happens?
As long as everyone hates you and not just one or two people.
Correct. That's
Yeah.
right. As long as it's consistent, you're all on a level playing field. It's good.
Yeah. It is funny, Tom, because all those qualities you've talked about, those skills and mindsets, are what you bring into a mediation. Like Sam's a mediator too. So, it's really funny you talking about all these challenges, and it's exactly the same pretty much as a mediator. So you probably would do good as a mediator, Tom. The only problem is you got to learn to shut up.
Yeah, well.
Right. I can sense some conflict coming between you two now. So.
He speaks a fair bit too, but like.
No, right. Yeah. Tom, do you have any inner conflicts? Anything that you're always kind of torn about which way to go? Any inner conflicts going on for you?
Yeah, I mean, I always used to debate doing something that you feel like doing now, even though it might not be the right thing, versus being future focused and knowing that this is probably a better decision. So it's this, it's this conflict of being a present focused person versus a future focused person. And I conflict a lot through that, right? Because on the one hand, I am and have been an ambitious person that always had unmet needs that I wanted to keep achieving, which more or less is, say, setting goals or targets. But on the other side of the token, and I've had a fair bit of illness in my life, with cancer. And because I've had that, I've always thought to myself, life's not a dress rehearsal. Why should I be concerned too much about the focus? You only live once. I don't know how long I've got longer to live. Just do what you feel like doing, right? So I often, have that conflict. I'm spiritual and I'm also religious. Being a Christian, I sometimes do things that are unchristian, and there's a bit of conflict there with my faith. And there's also been a fair bit of conflict that I think came within the family and my wife, and that happened through the four times that I've had cancer. You're not the same person. The person that goes into cancer is not the person that comes out of cancer. And the way that you look at the world is differently. And if someone that hasn't gone through that, like, you can explain it to them, but it's a bit like, how do you explain to someone what chocolate tastes like when you never tasted chocolate? Like, you can read the text of what it tastes like, or you can watch a video of what it tastes like, but unless you've tasted it, you can't really say 100% this is what it is. So the conflict probably at a family level, both with parents and wife, is that I've slowly over the years realized that there is not an endless number of tomorrows. So you often have conflict where people that might think, oh, you have got time, where you begin to realize, well, maybe I don't have time. And that affects decisions. So that causes conflict as well.
Yeah, because you've changed through your experience with cancer, and then they haven't quite caught up because they're still in the same world that at the beginning, and you've changed in some way. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting that we say that, because I just remembered they offered me counselling after the first time I had cancer in '06, and I chose at the time not to have it, and I was told that they thought it was important because it's a pretty high separation rate after a cancer diagnosis. They basically said if you've had cancer twice and you get through it, the probability of a divorce is really high because that person changed in that process, right? And often one party turns around and says, "Hey, I got a second chance in life. I'm not prepared to live my life on these terms." And that's why I think there's a lot of divorces that actually happen. Maybe they were heading in that direction, and then what happened is this life-threatening event that says you nearly lost your life. Is that the way you want to live it? Actually impacts people. So yeah, but I did get the counselling the two other times, and I've recently had it again, which I'm all, by the way, I'm all clear. Yeah,
Wow.
Yeah, it's a big journey, Tom. Four times, pretty amazing. You've continue on, and obviously, it does change how you view the world, and whether that then aligns with others. Is that sounds like the challenge itself.
ironically, Scott, I was thinking about it. Someone said it to me yesterday. He said, "Tom, the irony of it all is you work in a real estate industry, which is all about setting goals, yet
Mm,
the reality is for 19 years, and that's what it's been since my first diagnosis, my stage 4 diagnosis, was you only really have one goal when you've got a disease that they tell you is not fixable, and that is the gun in the back of your head not to go off that day. And for me, all of a sudden, my status has changed in the world of cancer. I now am considered treatable because of the advancements in treatment in 2024 with biospecifics and CAR T cell therapy. So they basically said to me, you should have a normal length of life. And then all of a sudden now I'm a person that is thinking, I also need to have, 1 year, 3 year, 5 year goals. So in many ways, I'm coming back around, joining the family about what are we going to be doing in 2030 and 35, right?
Yeah.
So maybe we will have less conflict now.
Yeah. And it's funny, we've just gone a full circle from talking about time being a time pressure in auctions, heightening emotions and making people have conflict. And then we've gone really big picture time now. When you feel like your time is short, it changes the way that you deal with conflict and what you're prepared to engage in or let go. So there is a bit of a theme here, isn't there? That pause and that time.
Sam, the other thing I was going to say is that I also work in real estate markets right across Sydney. I don't work for one company in one area. So I work right across. I even come to Byron and Gold Coast, and I do factories and commercial properties, and I do the rich part of Sydney. I do the poor part. I do the block in Melbourne. Typically I'll wake up and I'll start my auctions in Newtown in Sydney. And Newtown in Sydney is, I'd say it's a trendy, hip, strong gay community. And then I head west because of the traffic. So I'll leave the inner city and then I'll move into a family area like where I'm at in Haberfield or Concord. And then I'll move into an area that has got a very strong Asian community. And then I'll move into an area like Greenacre where it's a very strong Arabic, Lebanese, very strong Muslim community. And then I'll move out to the western suburbs where you'll have your factory workers, Shazza and Barry, and you meet a lot of different cultures. And one of the things that you notice is that there's a lot of conflict in dealing with different cultures because what you assume to be totally acceptable dealing with one culture. So you're constantly learning that culturally it's different. You're just mindful that what worked in your approach at Newtown with the two guys is not going to be working with Fatima and Salama in Greenacre that have got 7 kids that have migrated from Lebanon a few years ago. So I find that cross-cultural issues in my industry do create conflict.
Yeah.
Mm.
And very different approaches to conflict. I've actually got a great little story about that. One of my students and now a colleague is Portuguese. And so she came from a very Portuguese expressive family. She was in senior high school and she brought one of her first boyfriends home for dinner. And she thought the dinner went great. They had this great conversation. And when she walked out to say goodbye to him as he was getting picked up by his parents, he said, "Are you okay?" And she went, "Yeah, well, why?" And he went, "I've never seen a family argue like that." She's like, "That wasn't an argument. That was like dinner conversation." And she was gobsmacked that he'd thought they were having a massive fight and they were just having their normal, engaging debate type dinner conversation. So interesting, isn't it? How even what we think of as conflict is cultural.
Yeah. So, Sam, I just thought of a situation. I sold a property in the Canterbury Bankstown area, and it got really good money. It got $200,000 or $300,000 more than what the owner wanted, which is a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
And I went over, and the owner had a big smile on his face, and everyone was cheering. They were happy. They were tears coming out of their eyes. And I went over and I shook hands with the owner, and he goes, "Thank you so much." And I used the word mabruk, which in their culture is, celebrating, congratulations. And then I went over and I put out my hand to shake the wife's hand, and he just instinctively just went, "Toof," knocked it down out of the way. And then the agent, who is also Muslim, says, "Oh, don't shake hands with her," right? And it's weird. I thought to myself, man, we've gone from the heights of exhilaration, right, to this really, sad thing in a few seconds. But that's another example of cultural issues. But I totally get Sam. Listen, Greek homes aren't normal unless people are screaming at it.
Hey,
Yeah.
Tom, can I take you to AREC, which Sam may not be aware of? AREC is the biggest real estate event. Is it in the APEC region, Tom?
I think it's more than a real estate. I think it's actually the biggest business event of any event in
Yes.
Australia. 5,000 people. And in fact, we've got Kamala Harris, who's the key
Ooh.
speaker, that's flying out in 6 weeks' time for that conference. We get big names. We had Scott Dutton in person, by the way. You know, the best bit about Scott Dutton was the transfer costs were very cheap from Byron to the Gold Coast.
Oh gosh, I don't know. Going back from Scott Dutton to Kamala Harris, I mean, I guess you take what you can get after Scott.
Listen, Scott, I don't know what Kamala's got to say. Either John McGrath's going to interview her or I'm going to interview her. Scott was very, very, very good. I remember at the time, the one thing I remember is, and it has helped me, even though I do forget sometimes, is the replacement of the word but. And I was doing it so often, and it made me realize how much I would actually make that person feel they were irrelevant by one single word. They would give me a 10-minute essay and I would just reply back, "Yes, but," as if to say, "You've just wasted 10 minutes of your life."
It's a powerful little technique, the N stance it's called. I think you've also got Stephen Bartlett coming. I'm really interested to know who and what you're comfortable to share, of course, but we did have Mimi Kwa talk about Russell Crowe on the podcast not long ago. She had a interesting conflict with Rusty. I want to know, because you've interviewed some pretty big names over the years. I'd like to know, have you had conflict, or who was the most difficult one you've had to do other than myself?
You were up there, was one of the hardest. Yes, Scott.
High maintenance.
Let's put you aside. Let's put you aside. I've got to tell you, I actually find a lot of the high profile people can be challenging because what you see on stage and what you see off stage is often not aligned. I often find the audio doesn't match the video. I often find that it's like there's a button that's pressed and a different person is on the stage, and then they go off the stage, and then you just hear them talking about all the things that they may have said on stage that people shouldn't do, they're actually doing. I actually find that is very common, to be honest with you, with those that are just professional speakers. I'm not talking about Scott. I'm not talking about Scott. Reese Witherspoon. That was an interesting one, right? because what happened is she spoke 2 years ago and I interviewed her. And just beforehand, she was in a really bad mood. And we paid very big money for Reese Witherspoon, right? Very bad mood. And then what actually happened is at the time, John turned around and he said, look, we're about to go live. We were on a screen outside just before we got in front of the 5,000 people. And I remember sitting there and John goes, listen, it might end up becoming a short interview. So get the next speaker lined up. This might not be an hour because there are things going on there. And I said to her, Reese, we're about to go on. And I could tell she wasn't even paying any attention. She's talking away there. And then all I've got to tell you was like she pressed a button and it was, I think it's because they're professional actors, right? They're professional actors. She pressed a button and it was like, hi, Tom, how you going? So great to see. And it was just extraordinary. And it was just this amazing. And I just thought to myself, how, you should never assume things, right? You should never assume things. And then what actually happened is instead of cutting it shorter, we thought, man, we've got to keep going this. So we actually ended up going longer with her, right? And she just said some delightful things. I mean, nothing to do with your podcast, but she did say, she goes, the next time you're about to post something on social media, just remember when you're about to press that button, how is it going to make the people that see that post feel? Not how are you going to feel, how is it going to make others feel? And I just thought to myself, that's good advice because so often we become inclined to put that post in a world that's, very social now and real lives and social lives are often the same lives.
I like that advice. I want to follow up on the social media stuff because I know you've got a lot of followers, and I know the real estate industry can be very honest, like yourself. Have you dealt with much conflict in terms of social media and what people are posting? I've seen some of the comments in some of your posts, and they're pretty full on. How do you manage those?
Look, it's rather appalling when you read the comments, particularly on TikTok, on what they say, the racial comments. Like I have a lot of comments. Obviously, housing's a big issue in Australia, whether you're renting or buying. And there's a lot of people that are triggered by the fact that they may not be able to be in a position to buy or rent what they want. So you'll often have comments such as, oh, is this Australia or is this China? Is this auction in Sydney or is this in New Delhi? I also have people that might actually say comments that are very negative attacks on you. So over the years, I've changed my approach to social, and that is I never ever delete comments unless the comments are extremely rude. But if someone has an opinion, I allow them to have their opinion, even though it's my social media page. I have to say, Scott, I don't read a lot of them, right? So the truth of the matter is, I don't read a lot of them. I used to read a lot of them, and I don't give them that much attention, particularly those that don't have a true username and they identify. And you see that a lot with TikTok. User 273 or Snoopy Dog there. So I don't actually give those any thought at all, right? Because as far as I'm concerned, if they're not prepared to be who they are and they're hiding behind a screen as a keyboard warrior, I can't take that person seriously. So I automatically think to myself, they're probably sitting in some basement garage, upset with the world. So I don't even participate in that.
Sorry, Tom, how did you know that I was Snoopy Dog? How did you find that out?
Oh, we've got IT people that said, I want you to track that right down. And they ended up saying that he was a mediation teacher in Byron Bay that wears the same color shoes and bright jackets. So we narrowed it down to you, Scott Dutton.
Hey, Tom, my daughter has a great reply when people write mean things on social media. She says, I hope you find peace. Hating online isn't going to fill the void. Isn't that a classic response?
I go through phases. So I was stuck at an airport for 6 hours. And what I did is I wrote back to everyone that had been rude that particular month, and I had time, just have a bit of fun. Who hurt you? Who hurt you? That was all I did. I wrote that out about 1,000 times.
I get the
to
feeling Scott's just had a conflict with a glass of water. Have you?
How did you know? I did. I just felt me bottle of water everywhere. Go, don't make it land on the electricity things.
No. Let's hope you don't get electrocuted on camera. That's Scott's way of saying our time is nearly up. He has to create a scene, doesn't he?
Yeah, I got to create a drama if I can.
What have you done, Scott? Is it just water or is it something else?
It's water, but it's a whole bottle of water, so it's like
Oh no.
all over my electronic. It's all right. I'm just like being subtle about cleaning them up. Did you notice anything, or like?
Didn't notice a thing. No.
No.
Just my intuition.
Yeah.
Look, why don't we, while Scott's mopping up his desktop, Tom, so many things that you shared with us today, so much great advice. I wonder if you had to pick one thing to share with the audience, one tip for, managing conflict as best you can, what would be your advice?
Pause. I think pause. I think it's low-hanging fruit that you can bring into your life very easy. You can make it habitual. And the minute you start pausing, you're going to actually start feeling better, because when you reflect better, you're going to say, I was happier with the pause response than the instinctive response, because instinctively is always wrapped up in emotion, right? And what you want to try and do is to be emotion neutral in your conversations. So I would probably say for me, and I want to let everyone know, because I don't want anyone to think that this guy here is obviously pretty good at conflict. I'm not. I'm a work in progress, but I can tell you, I used to probably be a 2 or 3 out of 10, but I think I'm probably a 6 or 7 out of 10. I'm getting there.
That's great. And if you'd said that you were a 10 out of 10, we wouldn't believe you anyway. We'd be worried about your delusions of grandeur, because I don't think anyone is a 10 out of 10. Scott and I do this as our work. And we were saying the other day, practitioners are great with conflict as long as it's other people's. But as soon as it involves you personally, all your stuff comes up. You forget to pause. Yeah. We're all works in progress.
Sam, I've got to tell you, there's a sentence I use often that I think is helpful, and that is, how certain are you? Right? I find how certain are you seems to get involved in a lot of tense conversations, because when you say that, you're allowing for them to think an element, even a 1 chance in 100, what if I am wrong here?
Yeah.
Pausing and using that sentence, how certain are you? Because it also allows that person to reflect in that moment, to think, am I 100% certain on this? Could I possibly be wrong here? So it's been a pleasure. It's actually, I love doing podcasts, because I actually learn in the podcast often by having a conversation. You yourself are either getting a reminder or a light bulb moment.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, what we do with our guests is we help them reflect on their conflict experiences. And whenever you do that, you learn something about yourself from your own experiences. And we all get the benefit of learning it along the same time. So thank you so much for your generosity today.
It's a pleasure, Sam. It's a pleasure. And one day I'm going to have the yellow behind me too. I'm sure.
Scott wanted to have a halo put on his, and I drew the line at that. Yeah.
Scott's going to ask for a lot of strange requests.
At least he's not wearing his Where's Wally shirt today. That's always quite fun. It would clash horribly with the yellow.
Are you wearing red sneakers?
Maybe. I can't reveal.
Thank you. And
Thanks,
to all our
Tommy.
listeners, keep on working towards a peaceful future.
And enjoy your conflicts.
Thanks, Tom.